Trudeau is in Vancouver making a housing announcement today, and I'm warning you, it's so bad. It's so bad.
Today, we're here to tell you about our first announcement of what will be in our budget 2024. But before I get into the details, I want to step back and talk to you about what this upcoming budget is going to be all about. In one word, fairness. Why? Because for Canada to succeed, we need everyone to succeed.
Right, so let's translate that. This new budget is going to be about fairness. That's now an Orwellian newspeak term that Trudeau uses. When he says this budget's going to be about fairness, he now means it's going to be about diversity, equity, social equality, inclusion, and so on and so on and so on. It's going to be about advancing his contemptible agenda to plunge Canada deeper into this new age, new world order pit.
When you look out at the economy these days, it just doesn't feel very fair. With inflation, with high housing costs, with so much uncertainty here and across the world, it feels like there are some people doing really, really well, but a lot of people feel stuck, or worse, like they're falling behind.
Ironically, that's absolutely accurate. We do believe the economy is unfair. There are people who are doing really, really well, quote, really, really well, but yet there are still more, many more, who are not doing so well. It's just that who exactly are those doing really, really well? There he is. That's the irony of the entire situation, or of his entire quote. The economy is unfair because it protects big bureaucrats, big politicians, big government operatives from any sort of just consequence for their actions. Inflation. There's so much uncertainty in the market, says Trudeau. Who introduced that uncertainty? Did you introduce that uncertainty? Did I introduce that uncertainty? Of course not. Trudeau introduced that uncertainty. Bill C-69 is a good example of that uncertainty. No one, or fewer and fewer people anyway, are wanting to invest in this nation because no one knows what this radical Marxist is going to do to the markets tomorrow.
And when you look at who's feeling it the most, it's hard not to think about the young people trying to get their lives started in these complex times. Les jeunes ont peut-être les moyens de leurs parents something bigger than a one-bedroom apartment. And with the costs of groceries, monthly bills, and all the other realities of life going up, 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 well, that can make it hard to save for the future, hard to get ahead.
Whose fault is this? Whose fault are the high grocery prices? Whose fault are the high gas prices? Oh, we're going to introduce a new carbon tax, another carbon tax, a carbon tax increase. What a hypocrite. He would have the audacity to appeal to Canadians and say, I'm with you. I understand that costs are increasing in the country. I understand it's so difficult for all of you to make a living. Oh, but by the way, the carbon tax is increasing how many cents on April 1st? We're not going to stop it either. We're going to keep hammering you with those sorts of costs. But don't worry. I understand. I sympathize with all of you. Just take the new taxes. Take the inflation. Take all of these regulations. It's a joke.
Les Canadiens font face à de nombreux défis. Now, the foundation of a good life is stability. That starts with a place to call home. We know that
Actually, that's wrong. It starts with Christ. Stability is Christ. Life is Christ. The foundation of life itself is Christ. And ironically, even though Trudeau says the foundation of life is the home and talks about the home, he clearly doesn't want Canadians to have a foundation, because even if it were true that the foundation of life is the home, he's trying to take all our homes away.
One of the biggest issues people are facing is being able to afford a place to live, whether you're making mortgage payments or rent. This morning, I want to talk about renters. In today's Canada, more people are renting than ever before. And that number is growing at double the rate of those able to buy a new home compared to a decade ago. Nearly 2/3 of young Canadians rent their homes, and they spend a greater share of their income on housing than other generations. And in cities like Vancouver, where we are today, this is even more true. This is the most expensive city to rent in the country. Renters matter. And young Canadians put a lot of their hard-earned money towards rent. We think that should count for a lot more. So today we're announcing new protections for renters and new pathways to home ownership. As part of our upcoming budget, we're going to create a Canadian Renters' Bill of Rights. It would create a nationwide standard for lease agreements, give renters a clear history of apartment pricing so they can bargain fairly, and make sure they have more agency.
Okay, so this is such garbage. This is pure socialism. Of course, the media and the Liberal government is going to spin this as a brilliant, a wonderful, an evolution, a brilliant and wonderful evolution in the rights, as Trudeau mentioned, of renters. Free market capitalists should be happy about this because it gives the individual more autonomy, more freedom. But that's not the case. That isn't true. Instead, it's government imposing more and more restrictions and regulations in the market, demanding that private actors play as the government wants them to play. Take, for example, this new regulation that's coming into effect with the budget, that there's going to have to be a history on the price of rent. Does Trudeau think the price of rent is stagnant? Like, does he honestly believe that the price of rent doesn't change? What, a renter's going to go to a condo and say, well, this was $3,000 per month 10 years ago, and now it's $7,500. Market conditions change, prices change, inflation changes, carbon taxes change. All of these variable factors in the market are dynamic, and so causes the price of rent to change. This is already making those who own rental units out to be oppressors, to be bad men, and they're not.
We're going to launch a new legal aid fund that will protect tenants against unfairly rising rents, rent evictions, and bad landlords. And finally, we're going to help you make your rent count towards you becoming a homeowner. We'll do that by making sure that the fact that you pay your rent every month, which remember is a pretty significant amount of money, that payment and that demonstrated reliability that you've shown over months and years is taken into account when you apply for a mortgage. We're going to amend the Canadian Mortgage Charter and call on landlords, banks, credit bureaus, and others to make sure that your rental history is taken into account in your credit score. This will make it easier to qualify for a mortgage or even qualify you at a lower rate. And just think about all the other things that'll come from having a better credit score.
Okay, so what does this mean? More spending, more spending, more spending, more spending. Canada has unbelievably low savings rates because, of course, no one has money to save. It's all being shoveled into the other necessities of life. And yet still, Trudeau says we have to spend more. We have to spend more. We have to buy more homes. We need to buy more homes, and so on and so on. So we're going to make it as easy for you to do so as possible. But we already did that. We already tried that in Canada. For years, it was easy to buy a home. It was cheap. That is, at least interest rates were low. They were unsustainably low. And during the lockdowns or right before or right after, it seemed for everyone to be the perfect time to buy a home because, again, interest rates were low. There was a boom. Everyone needed a new place to live because they were staying at home and couldn't go out. So they needed more space for themselves and their families. And yet look where we are now. Trudeau wants to ride this inflationary train as long as he can, and he wants it to keep increasing and increasing and increasing. It can't. It's impossible. He's denying reality yet again to advance his ridiculous objectives and ideals. This entire amendment that he's introducing in the next budget does it vilifies rent owners. It vilifies owners, condo owners, those who construct the property that renters rent from. It's going to discourage investment. It's going to discourage people from becoming rental owners for fear that their tenants can take them to court for this, that, or the other thing, armed and guarded by government to get a better deal.
Loan to help you start a small business, for example. On va rendre l'économie plus équitable pour les locataires. Work hard, you're a good investment. And what is a better investment than in you, young Canadians? You make up the largest share of our working age population. You work hard. You're creating, inventing, and developing incredible things that are building the future of Canada. You hustle. You are the heartbeat of the economy. And Canada's success in the 21st century depends on you. Now, there are renters of every age across this country, and these protections and opportunities will be there for every one of you. This is just one of the things that we're going to be doing in this upcoming budget to build an economy that is fair for every generation.
Want to make the economy fair? He has to be removed from power. His government has to be removed. They are the most unfair, hypocritical demagogues perhaps to ever walk in Canadian office. Wow, what an embarrassment.
It's now my great pleasure to introduce to you the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, Chrystia Freeland.
Okay, so if you weren't sick enough, grab your bucket because Freeland's back and now she's going to speak.
He doesn't need the step, but I do. Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Thank you so much, Harj, for hosting us here. Thank you to some of our amazing BC MP colleagues. It's so wonderful to see you. And thanks above all to the young people who are here with us, and especially the young families. I heard a few parents trying to shush their children as they sort of chirp in the backdrop, and the parents. A fair chance to build a good middle class life, to do as well as your parents or better, has always been the promise of Canada.
Well, it's not right now. The Liberals talk about building this middle class. They've been in power for how many years now? Why haven't they built it? What have they been doing for the last, 8 years? What have they been doing? Crushing Canada is what they've been doing.
Today, for too many younger Canadians, that promise just isn't being fulfilled. The hurdles are too high. Young Canadians are not getting a fair chance.
I can hardly stand to listen to Freeland because she talks to us like we're kindergartners. She talks to us like we're 6 years old. She has that voice which stings with intolerable kindness. It's not her voice, it's the tone of her voice. It's the manner in which she speaks to us. It's wrong. We're not stupid. We know what's going on. We see how corrupt her government, the Trudeau government, is, and we know that their policies are here to completely destroy the nation. We're not fooled.
Many younger Canadians had a really tough introduction to their adult lives. Millennials coming of age in the early 2000s endured the chaos and the challenge and the limited opportunities caused by the Great Recession. Many in Gen Z became adults during the COVID pandemic. What a hard time to enter adulthood. Both generations have strived to pursue careers and start families at a time of high inflation, high interest rates, and really high housing costs. It is so understandable that many young Canadians feel as though the deck is stacked against them. Something doesn't add up.
It doesn't. Here we have government politicians like you making all of this money and doing so well for yourself while your constituents suffer. That doesn't make sense at all. Here we have a supposed public servant, an elected representative of the people, doing so much better than the people. That doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense at all. If a private market individual, someone working at a private job, was doing their job poorly, they'd be fired, and rightfully so. What about this?
It used to be that if you studied hard, if you got a job, if you worked hard, your reward would be a good middle class life. That was the equation. That was the promise of Canada. But today, younger Canadians can get a good job. They can work hard, but too often that reward remains out of reach.
Why? Why? Is it free market capitalist problem? Or is it a free market capitalist problem? Is it a problem of too much individual innovation in the nation? Of course not. Absolutely not. It comes from more socialism, more socialism, more socialism. It comes from policies like Freeland's. This is a bad speech, even from Freeland standards. This one is tough to listen to.
There are so many wonderful young Canadians, some young families here with us today. And I know that you, like young Canadians I speak to across the country, are worried. You look at the way your parents live and you wonder, how will I ever be able to afford that? A similar sense of anxiety exists among those of us who care about you.
She would have the audacity to say she cares about Canadians? Oh my word. Wow. What do we say to that? What are we supposed to say to that? How can we even answer such a ridiculous comment? It doesn't deserve response. It doesn't demand the dignity of a response because it's so absolutely verifiably false.
About our younger generation, your parents, your grandparents, your older sisters and brothers. We're worried too. We feel for our younger generations who have faced unfair burdens and who face unfair obstacles. What so many parents have achieved for themselves, a degree of comfort, a degree of security, we want for our children too. We want your hard work to be rewarded, just as it was for us. We want you to face the future with a sense of optimism, a sense of anticipation, not with a sense of angst.
So I can't listen to any more. My guess is you can't listen to any more of this nonsense either. Freeland says we want to give you a sense of optimism, a sense of hope for the future. And to be entirely honest, I have hope for the future. I have a great sense of optimism for the future. Not because Freeland is in charge, but because Jesus Christ reigns and is coming back down to earth to rule once for all time, for all eternity. That's my optimism. That's my hope. It's certainly not placed in demagogues like Freeland, like Justin Trudeau, like Stephen Guilbeault, like any member of government from any party for that matter. All of them consistently fail us precisely because they are fallen men and women. If we want a description of Jesus, we have to thank Freeland and Trudeau because they provide descriptions that are exactly opposite of who he is. We want to know who Christ, or we want to know what Christ is like. He's exactly opposite of Freeland. He doesn't speak to us like we're toddlers. He doesn't speak to us like we're fools. He doesn't try to pull the wool over our eyes. He doesn't stink with this intolerable air of political privilege. On the contrary, he was a normal man. He is a normal man. He's a working man. He was a carpenter while he was on earth. He was every bit as normal as any man who's ever lived. Those in political office, high political office, hated him. They continue to hate him today. They hate what he stands for. They hate the fact that he is law itself. But it doesn't change the fact that Christ was raised from the dead, proving his divinity, proving his supremacy over all things, proving that he was and is God himself. It doesn't change the fact that he's ruling on the throne, and that as much as Freeland and Trudeau want to try and usurp him, want to try and remove him from that position of power, they won't. They can't. And there is going to be a day in which Christ comes back, which is happening very soon. And all of these leaders, all of these politicians, so full of pride, puffed up, telling us how we're supposed to live, are going to have to give an account for their actions. I wonder what their response, what their defense is going to be.